Welcome to Collective SOULversations, where spirit leads, truth rises, and the real conversations happen. I'm Jody Jones, psychic medium, medical medium, frequency healer, and spiritual mentor. Every week, I sit down with world class visionaries, spiritual teachers, healers, entrepreneurs, disruptors, and truth tellers who carry keys for this moment in our collective evolution. We go beyond surface talk into the energies, the patterns, and the spiritual codes that activate deep healing, awaken higher consciousness, and call you into full energetic leadership of your life. These are the conversations that stir something inside you, and once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. Wherever you're tuning in, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and get ready to step fully into the SOULversation. Let's begin. Hey, everybody, welcome to Collective SOULversations. I am your host, Jody Jones, and I have a very interesting guest with us today. It's a little bit different than what we have been doing. It's actually the first guest that we're going to be bringing on talking about this. And I was just telling our guest that my husband actually found him, had been watching some podcasts and really found it very interesting and was like, you need to get this guy on your show. So we have him here with us today. So we're going to ask some really big questions. I'm going to start off with, and this, I'm going to introduce him, bring him on. But first, here's a really big question. And as a medium, I get asked it lots and have over the years. And that's what happens when you die? Big loaded question, right? So most of us ask that question with fear, right? But what if someone could answer it with certainty? So today's guest is John J. Davis, a man whose heart stopped on an operating table at the age of 21 and who came back with a story that will shake you awake. So John didn't just float through a tunnel of light. He was given a tour by a spirit guide named Alan through what he described as as a magnificent otherworldly building on the other side. And what he saw challenges every idea we've been taught about death, life, love, and why we're even here. He returned with a divine assignment to tell the world that there is no such thing as death, that our lives here are temporarily classrooms, and that each one of us is guided, loved, and never alone. So today, we're not just talking about a near-death experience, we're cracking open the veil between the worlds. So let's go there, guys. Welcome, John. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Jody, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I always love sharing my story. I always enjoy it. So thank you so much for the invitation.
That's beautiful. And I know this firsthand just because I actually had a near-death experience when I was 3 years old. So
Oh, really?
I do understand the purpose of when this happens. And it's very interesting because there's an energetic shift that takes place in people that have near death experiences. And for you, just vibrationally, you're very, very light vibrationally. And so that makes sense to me because obviously there was a greater purpose in what happened to you. But in sometimes in ways that we can't even understand, we can't even fully comprehend. So I need to ask you this question. Before this happened to you, what was your mindset before the near death experience?
Absolutely. Well, my whole mindset back then, I was only 21 when this happened. And all of my experience with anything spiritual was based on Catholicism. My dad was very Catholic, and he would always take my sister and I to church several times during the week, and then also on Sundays. So I was pretty much raised with that. That was my whole reality, my whole idea of spirituality, everything that happens when we die, the purpose of life. It was all centered around Catholicism.
Mhm.
And then when I had my NDE, all of that changed. My whole worldview changed.
I would imagine because we know how rigid, the Catholic teaching is, the church, most
Yeah.
religions as far as how it needs to look. And it's a limited perception, right? We forget, and I find this interesting because sometimes when I'm talking to somebody who's very religious, um, you know, I realize that they don't remember that this is not being written by God himself, that it's actually being written just by men, mere mortals who are giving
Yeah,
their perception of things. And so, because of that, things definitely get lost in translation, right? And
very true. Yep.
yeah, and things obviously have been left out or omitted for, certain, the church doesn't want us to be too empowered. They don't want us to, remember who we are. And so how did the Catholic upbringing shape your fears and ideas about God before going into the near death experience?
Well, when I was raised in religion, I was always just scared about what was going to happen. We had never talked about really the idea of dying. It was almost like it was a taboo subject.
Mhm.
Even with religion, we never really. It was something that you tried to forget about it. You didn't want to think about it, and I think the reason was because of there was so much fear around it. There was a fear of judgment and a fear of not living your life correctly. And how are you supposed to live?
Mhm.
And the thing that I always had the hardest time with was believing that you were supposed to fear God. That never that just never made sense to me. Why would you fear your creator? And that was one of the hardest things that I grew up with, believing that you have to fear God. Everybody is sinful. Everybody has to be saved. And I just had the hardest time kind of getting away from that. And my NDE really changed all that for me. It was almost like I went from being very religionistic to being much more spiritually natured. And I learned that life on earth is only temporary. That's how God set it up. We're not here forever, and we're supposed to go back to heaven or the other side or the afterlife. That's the real world. This world here is only temporary.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm just curious because as you're talking, I'm just wondering because there are a lot of people who still, and especially, with the Catholic religion in particular, that there is a very, don't worship any other gods than me, that all of the, the 10 commandments, all
Yeah.
of the, um, so do you feel like, because there's a certain type of personality, I think, that likes that kind of rigidness or that kind of like, structure of I need to know that that power exists, and if I do something wrong that I'm going to be punished, or and I feel like there's a certain personality that even maybe consciously they're not aware that they're drawn to that kind of restrictive life. Do you feel like prior to the near death experience that you were somebody just naturally though who like questioned things, like was just not taking things at face value and had that kind of natural curiosity?
Oh yeah. I wasn't a very good Catholic. The older I got, I just kept asking questions. And my poor dad, he didn't know how to answer all my questions.
Right.
And I remember there was a pivotal moment for me when I was 11 years old. We went to my great grandmother's funeral. Her name was Grace, Grandma Grace. And I remember back then, when you had a funeral, they would have the casket open and everybody would line up and they would walk by and say their final goodbyes to this person. Well, it was my turn. I was 11 years old, and I remember this so clearly. Walked up to the casket, I saw her laying there, and I immediately thought, this cannot be the end of this beautiful woman. All of her loves, all the things she liked, all the things she believed in, all of her hopes and dreams. That can't just be the end of somebody. And I always had this unending questioning about there's got to be something more. I just don't know what it is because religion never seemed to answer any of the questions that I really wanted to learn or really wanted to know about. It just seemed so limiting in that religion didn't have all the answers. And after my NDE, I realized that religion is what people use to try to understand God, but not every religion has all the truth. I think there's parts of every religion that are true, but not everybody has it all. And that I think was one of the most poignant lessons I learned about the difference between religion and spirituality.
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
just and that and just because we were told to believe something doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
I think that was something that was really pivotal for me to learn that just because I was raised in a certain way doesn't mean that what I was told is the actual whole truth.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I also would extend that into the whole spiritual world and the spiritual community. It's the same thing. If there's one thing that spirit has shown me over and over again, is that there's no one being that has all the answers,
Exactly. Yep.
right? So it's the exact same thing. And so I feel like you can take these little extractions from all of these perspectives and then create your own perception of everything, and that's ultimately how you have your experience. So I'm really excited because I did not cheat and I did not listen to the podcast that you've been on, and I haven't heard it. So
Okay.
I'm excited, and I'm going to be with our listeners hearing it for the first time. So take us inside the moment that you crossed over.
Sure, sure. Do you want me to tell you how this whole thing started?
Absolutely, yes, yes,
Okay, sure.
take us all the way through so we can follow the magical trail.
Sure, and Jody, as I go, if you have any questions, certainly just interrupt me. I have no problem with that at all.
Awesome.
Well, my story starts back in 1987. I was 21, and my dad was in sales, and he won a sales contest. And part of what he won were these mopeds, or what we would call scooters now. And we used to ride these things all over the neighborhood. Well, one day I had an accident, and I crashed into a tree, and I tore the tendons off my right hand, and I needed to have surgery to have them reattached. Well, I was only 21 and I had never spent any time really in a hospital and I had never had surgery. So I had no idea what to expect. So my mom drives me down to the hospital or to the clinic, and we go in and they start to give me the IV to knock me out for the surgery. Well, something horrible happened, and I had a horrible allergic reaction to the anesthesia, and it stopped my heart. And I remember my eyes closed, and the very next second, it was like a heartbeat. I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. It was this gorgeous white marble building, and it was so long. It was so long, I could not see the end of it. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I had no idea the hospital was this big. Because I didn't know that I had died. During
Right.
my whole experience, I didn't know, nobody told me that I died. So I'm in this beautiful building, and on the right-hand side are these gorgeous white marble columns, just like you'd see in Greece. Beautiful, tall, maybe 20 or 30 feet high, and they went all the way down about 6 feet apart. And in front, and where I was standing in the middle of this building were these marble white tables, and they had benches on each side, and they went as far as you could see. And there were two people sitting at every one of these tables. Well, right about then, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And what happened is this spirit guide told me everything that I was seeing through my entire experience. He took me on this journey of a part of the other side. And what he told me was I was in the orientation building. Well, there were two people sitting at every one of these tables. And he told me that they're orientation counselors. Well, one thing I want to tell your audience, and this is kind of sets the stage for this. A lot of times when you hear people who have a near death experience, they're in some kind of an accident or they're in a hospital and something happens and they die, and they find themselves floating above their body looking down at the scene. And then they become aware of a tunnel. and they start going down this tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel is a white light. Well, before they get there, they're met by somebody, someone in their family, someone who's passed, a loved one, a parent, and they tell them it's not your time. You have to go back. So we never knew what's on the other side of that white light until my experience. And I think this is one of the most profound parts of my whole experience was that where I was on the other side in this orientation building, that's what's on the other side of the white light. When you cross into the white light, you end up in the orientation center. Well, to the left of me, in this gorgeous white marble building, the only way I can describe it, it was like tunnels. It looked like doorways that were cut out of solid marble, about 6 feet apart, going all the way down as far as you can see. And my guide said, "Look at the next tunnel." So I looked up, and there was a man. There was a gentleman coming through this tunnel. He was an elderly man. He was probably 80 or 90 years old, and his right hand was holding his chest like he had pain. And my guide said he just died from a heart attack. Well, these tunnels, I don't know what they are. I don't know if they're wormholes or I don't know what they are, but that's how we cross back and forth from the other side to Earth.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when we pass, we go through these tunnels. Well, with this woman, this orientation counselor that was next to this tunnel, she stood up. She knew, and I don't know how they know this, but they know when people are going to come through. They know whose lifetime just finished. So she walked up, she took his hands in hers, and she walked him back to the table and they sat down. And she held his hands the whole time. I was too far away to hear what she was saying, but she was talking to him. And my guide said that the reason these orientation counselors are there is because when a person goes into a lifetime on earth, most of us forget where we're from. We don't remember. And I think that's something that God did. So we
Mhm.
don't remember. So when we come back through the tunnel, many people get confused about where they just were and what happened. And that's the job of these orientation counselors. They just help people remember where they're from.
Right.
Well, my guide said, "Watch him. Watch this gentleman." So as I watched him and I watched her talk to him, the craziest thing happened. He started to change. He changed from an elderly gentleman to a young man in his 30s.
Wow.
Yeah. And my guide said everybody on the other side is in their 30s. Well, I didn't think to ask why that is. I don't know if it was because of Jesus when he died, or I don't know
Right.
the reason, but we're
Right.
all we're all young over there.
Yeah.
Well, next he stood up and he walked over to the right and he walked between one of these columns and he walked down 3 steps into what I call the gardens. I don't know if that's what they call them, but that's what it looked like to me. It was the most beautiful garden I have ever seen. The greenest grass and flowers and trees and plants. It looked like the most perfect English garden you've ever seen.
Right.
And there were all these people there. And I didn't know what they were doing at first, but there must have been hundreds of people here. Well, what it was after you have your orientation, you go into what is called the reunion when you get back. And somehow, I don't know how all these people know this, but on the other side, everyone knows when a person's lifetime is going to be finished.
Hmm.
And they all gather waiting for this person to come back. So everybody that this gentleman had known in his lifetime, parents, siblings, friends, everybody was there to greet him. And everybody was applauding, they were hugging him. It was like this big party. And my guide said, this happens because when people come to Earth, it's like the person has to be a warrior. They have to be a fighter because life on this planet is really difficult. It's one of the hardest places to come.
Mhm.
And there are many souls who don't want to come here because it is so hard. So they're rooting for us. So many people are rooting for us. You wouldn't believe it. when we actually come into a lifetime.
Yeah,
And
it's
so all
amazing.
these yeah, all these people were there waiting for him. It was just so neat to see that. Oh, one thing I forgot. Not only are all the people there, but all of your animals.
Wow.
And that was one of the most extraordinary things to see, that all the animals that we loved in our lifetime, they
Yeah.
also make the transition just like we do.
I think a lot of people will be happy to hear that part because I think a lot of people like their animals and miss their animals more than they're humans sometimes.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I need to ask this just because this comes up. So you say that, so there's the white light when people have the near death experience and then they have the choice of going to it or coming back. So did you ask your guide or did you find out why were you allowed to go through the light and into everything? Why were you given all of that? The hall
I don't
pass, I
I
guess,
have
the hall pass.
I have absolutely no idea. I didn't even I didn't even go through the tunnel. Somehow, and I don't
Bypass
know
it.
I
Yeah.
don't know how, but I just ended up in the orientation center
Yeah.
and realized that these tunnels, when you look in them, it looks like looking into space.
Right. Yeah,
It
cuz they're portals. They're
Yeah,
yeah, it's a
exactly.
portal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I realized from other people's near death experiences afterwards, after I had mine, that the light that people see is the light that's emanating from the orientation center. And
Mm,
that's what leads them when they finish their life and they go down the tunnel. That's what
right.
leads them to the orientation center.
Wow.
Yeah, it was absolutely mind blowing.
And so technically you were clinically dead for only 7 minutes, right? Like
Exactly.
that's the
Yep.
and interesting the number 7 as well, when we talk about the 7 because we go into 7 cycles every 7 years, there's that change.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Which is very interesting. But so obviously, though, time moves differently on the other side. So, what did that part feel like? Like timelessness, expansion, collapse? Like, what did it feel like to you?
Here's what's really interesting, and I don't know how this works. I only know that it's valid. When I was having my experience, I felt like I was over there for 2 hours. I could not believe that only all of the things that they had showed me happened
Hmm.
in only 7 minutes. I
Yeah,
couldn't believe that.
yeah.
And the other thing that's so remarkable is when you're on the other side, when a person comes into a lifetime, their perception is that they're going to be gone for what we would call 2 or 3 months, but you might live 90 years. But when
Mm,
you get back, it feels like you just left. And I don't understand how that dynamic works. I don't, it's a God thing because
yeah,
they don't experience linear time the way we do.
right.
So we might live 80 or 90 years, but on the other side, before you come in, you feel like I'm only going to be gone for 2 or 3 months.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
explain how that works.
Well, I think we get bleed throughs here, in this realm sometimes like that. I was just having this conversation. So my mom passed away last year, and on July 29th, that'll be the day that she passed. So it's almost coming up to a year. And to
So
me, energetically, it feels like it happened last week.
it
So I
does.
feel like we get these time, bumps or condensations that, condensions that come in sometimes that we feel because really there's no such thing as time or space at all,
Yeah.
right? It's a constraint of the mind that we create when we're here because we need it to be able to do the things that we do. Now,
Yeah. Yep.
you say, and of course, because of my gifts of being able to read energy, follow energy when you're talking, they are actually showing me what you saw, which is, if
Oh,
I could
wonderful.
share with everybody the majesty of it all, because it's very right, very very profound, elegant, very high vibrational, everything that they're showing you. So you say though it wasn't a tunnel, it was a building. So what exactly could you see the outside of it? Were you just seeing the inside of it?
Here's what happened. My my guide, and I didn't even know what a guide was. I'd never even heard of a spirit guide.
Right.
So what he did is he took me to the outside of every one of these places first so I could describe to people what I was seeing. And the orientation building looks like And I found this accidentally by Google one day. I just found it. So your audience can go to Google and they can type in Temple of Artemis, spelled Artemis, and it's a building in Turkey, in the country of Turkey, and it looks almost exactly like what I saw. It's
Hmm.
this huge, long building with columns on all the sides, beautiful white marble, and that's what this building looked like. And so every time my guide took me to some place, he took me to the outside first, and then he took me to the inside so I could see what these buildings were for. And the best way that I can describe it, it was kind of like wherever they took me was like a college campus. There were people everywhere. Wherever I was, it was really busy. And they had buildings like, like on a college campus, you have your English building, your
Right.
science building, and all these different
Yeah.
buildings. That's what
Right.
it felt like. That's what it
Right.
felt like where I was. And many of the buildings there are beautiful white marble, gorgeous buildings. I mean, they were so large. The only thing I could think of that we have even comes close to how big they were is the pyramids in Egypt.
Right.
They were
Right.
just humongous.
And so did you have the awareness of like what was the weather like? Was it
It was
sunny? Was it
absolutely perfect. It was perfect weather. It was
okay?
like the most perfect sunny day. Sun was out, no clouds, no wind. It was just a perfect day, and the temperature was like 72 degrees. It wasn't hot, it wasn't cold, it was absolutely just everything about it was
It was
perfect.
it was just perfect. And
Yeah.
so you say that there were all of these people and you could see these souls that were coming through and they were meeting up with their people. So at any point did you meet your people? Did you see any of your people?
No, I didn't see anybody that I lost, and I
Yeah.
think it was because there just wasn't enough time. I did see 2 of my cats, though. I've always had animals my whole life, and when I
Yeah.
was growing up, I had these 2 cats named Boo and Muffin, 2 little boy kitties that we adopted, and I had them all the way until I think I was 19 or, 19 or 20. And I saw them on the other side. They were both there and they were young
Awesome.
again. Neither one of them were sick. And that's when I realized too, when I watched this gentleman come through the tunnel, and
Yeah.
he changed. Because the other side, nobody is sick. There's no death. There's no wars. There's no hunger. There's no poverty. There's no disease. Nothing like
Right.
we have
Right.
here. It's like a perfect paradise.
Yeah. So so you were 21, so that's pretty young, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like at a, when I talk about those cycles of life, it's kind of like, you're just going into one of the cycles. So
Yeah.
at that time, did you meditate? Did you pray? Did you talk to guides? Was there any of that in what you were experiencing at all?
The only thing I ever did before my NDE was I just talked to God all the time, mostly when I was driving, just asking God to give me direction. Because back then, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with my life. I had no idea. I had learning disabilities when I was growing up, and I never believed I would ever be able to go to college, but I
Mm.
eventually did. But back then, I was just asking for guidance. I knew that you were supposed to pray because I was raised Catholic. So I
Right.
always prayed to God. I didn't know that we all had spirit guides. I had no idea. So I just
Mm.
talked to God all the time. And I went to the beach a lot. I went to the beach because I grew up in California and I was only an hour's drive from Santa Cruz. So I went to the beach probably once a month. And I would sit on the beach, watch the water, and just talk to God and always asks for guidance, always ask for help. And I do that to this day still.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you say that you had learning disabilities when you were younger. I'm like they're just showing the little pieces of why you were chosen, why this path came out for you. So if you're okay, if you're comfortable with talking to us about that, just
Sure.
because they're just saying not neurotypical. And so I feel like that's why you were given this opportunity, right? This but obviously with a sense of purpose. Nobody has a near death experience without it having some type of purpose. And so I want to unpack that a little bit with you. So tell us a
Sure.
little bit about you're saying the learning disabilities.
Sure. Yeah. When I was a little kid, I had an ideal childhood until kindergarten started. When kindergarten started, I started to realize that there was something different about me because I couldn't catch on, and I had to retake kindergarten. I had to repeat kindergarten, and it was a struggle for me. And then when I got to first grade, that's when I realized that something was significantly different about me because in first grade, as opposed to kindergarten, you start getting grades. In kindergarten, kids don't get grades.
Right.
Well, in first grade, that's when I got my first report card, and it was all D's. And I even got a D minus. And I remember thinking, how do you give a child a D minus?
Right.
But and things just got worse and worse. Nothing ever got better. Kindergarten, once I got out of kindergarten, things just started to get worse and worse for me academically. I
Hmm.
couldn't keep up. I couldn't understand what was going on. I just had a horrible, horrible time. And that lasted all the way through high school. 12 years of getting D's. And I thought there was something permanently wrong with me.
Hmm.
I couldn't learn. It wasn't that I couldn't learn. It's just that I learned that it took me longer. And I
Hmm.
didn't know that I needed to study more when I was in school. Nobody had ever told me why we're even going to school. I
Right.
didn't have any idea about why we're going to school in the first place.
Right.
My parents never told me. I never had teachers say, "You're going to school so that you can learn to have a career when you get out of high school. Maybe you want to go to college." And I grew up with I suffered a lot as a child.
Yeah, no
It was
doubt.
it was it was terrible for me. And
Yeah.
the thing that was the hardest was everybody knew, all the other kids knew how much I was struggling. Because back then, the teachers would have everybody grade each other's papers,
Right.
and everybody knew how everyone else was doing.
Yes. The old pass the paper behind you and then
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Pass it behind you, pass it in front of you,
Right,
you
right.
know, and that's my whole early education was like that.
Yeah.
I never believed I could go to college. Well, what I did is I went to the University of Colorado. I got a bachelor's, and I absolutely loved going to school. And then I went and I got a master's, and I thought, that I can't be that slow if I could actually go to college.
Right.
And I think what the difference was is that I just studied. I just studied all the time.
Yes.
And I think when I was, in grade school, I think I had almost given up because
Mhm.
I thought I couldn't learn.
Yeah.
That
And
was a
so what did you end up taking in university then? What was your master's and your bachelor? What was it
my
on?
my bachelor's was in psychology, and my master's was in human resources.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
And that makes total sense because, when you were younger, and we see this a lot now, especially, when we talk about star seeds. I don't know if you're
I've
familiar
heard
with
that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So there are more and more of what we call hybrids that come in. So they're not, so this kind of realm, the earth realm, is very strange to them. They don't understand the reasonings of the why, the what.
yeah,
And they also are very, they don't fit inside a box or a program very well. And so on paper, they can show up as, not smart,
yeah,
right? But that's just because their mind is always, expanding on things and looking for more and reaching, asking the big questions. But what happens is often they get stuck in that system and then, they lose their confidence. They don't feel right. We have that whole loop. But I'm
yeah,
so excited that they found you. Obviously, I believe that when you had the near death experience, that changed things for you, the trajectory of, your purpose and what you were supposed to do. So clearly, going and taking psychology and getting your master's and all of that, now you understand a few things about how the brain works and why
yeah,
and all of
yeah,
that stuff.
exactly,
I love that.
exactly.
I love that. That's brilliant. So, having said that, this is also, your spirit guide, Alan is his name.
Yep,
I love that too because obviously they had to give you a name that you would like resonate with, that you weren't, how do I pronounce that? Some of the
yeah,
it's funny because we all have spirit guides, and in my entirety of working with my spirit team, I've never ever been given a name. Never, ever. And it never has bothered me. I have never been like, "Can you tell me what your name is?
Yeah,
I need to
yeah,
know it." Because time and time again, and clients over the years would always come for readings and be like, "What's my spirit guide's name? What's my?"
yeah,
And they would always say to me, "It doesn't matter. We don't If we give you a name, it's just for you the sake of you having a name so that you can feel a little bit more familiar with that, of who we are."
yep,
But some of the imaginations, though, of the names that people come up with always to me makes me giggle a little bit. But I love Alan for you because
yeah.
that's like the perfect name for
It
you.
was, what was so weird is when he said it, I could see how, in my mind, I could see how it was spelled, Allen,
Yeah.
and I don't know where that came from, but
Right.
I could see it spelled on my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So tell us a little bit about Alan. Tell us what you learned about him when you met him and how that went.
Well, he was I never, and I don't know why I did this, but I never looked to my left to see what he looked like.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, "So, where have you been?" They have a really good sense of humor over there.
Right.
He knew
Right.
where I was. He knew I was here, but he was
Yeah.
just saying, "So, where have you been?" But I never looked at him. I never looked over to, and I don't know why I didn't do that, but
Yeah.
everything was just happening so quickly, and he
Yeah.
was taking me to all these different places. I never stopped to look and see what he looked like. He was just
Right.
it was always like he was just telling me everything in my ear.
Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting too, is that this happened so long ago, but I think what God gave me was the ability to remember, because I remember every single detail of what Alan said. I remember everything he showed me, and anything anybody else said. I remember it like it happened yesterday.
Right.
And what's so weird about that is I normally have a really bad memory,
Right.
but I remember this experience, and I think that was because they wanted me to be able to tell people everything that I experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also you know, the greater purpose of when somebody comes through and shares the near death experiences with us is that so we have that remembering because we know this, that there's no such thing as death and dying. That's
Yep.
a big part of it, right? And it's very interesting where they would have to pick somebody who has that ability. So again, when you're in the 3D aspect of it, you drop in density frequency wise, so your memory's not great. Your
Yeah.
your scholarly abilities are not that great, but they would know vibrationally that once they took you out of the realm, that you had the capability to remember and be able to recall and like it was yesterday, right? Because
Yeah.
again,
Yep.
there's no such thing as time or space.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right? So we're talking to, the John that is here right now in this particular realm that you guys are listening to. But this experience that John is happening is actually happening right now, just in another realm. I know it's mind blowing and it's hard,
Yeah.
you can get lost in that and be like, well, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
But that's because there's no such thing as time or space. That's just the interesting part of it. Now, about Alan though, and obviously you didn't need to look to the side because he was familiar to you.
Yeah.
There obviously was this sense of like, I trust you, because normally, if we plopped you down somewhere here on the earth plane and all of a sudden you were like, say we took you all the way from Colorado and put you into Ontario,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's some guy standing beside you that all of a sudden that's talking to you, you probably would look over and be like, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
And
Why are you talking to me?
yeah, yeah, what am I doing here? So clearly there was that, familiarity about him. Do you think, and now, as obviously you've had some time to sit with this, do you think that he was like somebody that you knew, or was there any of that in place with that?
Not yet. I just like just what you said. I felt absolutely comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything that he was telling me and showing me, it was like, this is extraordinary. This is absolutely fantastic. And
Right.
I absolutely trusted everything he said. And I don't know, I can't explain how, because I don't ever remember anything about him.
Yeah.
But he was the spirit guides are with us on the other side, and they help us plan our lifetimes. That's why
Right.
they're there. That's why they know what we're going to be accomplished, or what we want to accomplish.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I absolutely trusted him. It was
Right.
the way his voice was so calming, and I felt totally at peace and safe. And it's just an extraordinary sense of this is someone that I've known
Mhm.
forever.
Right. Yes, yes, they made you purposely feel super, super comfortable. So, when you were in that, that whole arena of seeing everything, did they show you Earth from the were you able to see Earth? What did
There's
they show you
there's
about that?
there is something in a little bit. I'll get to it. There's and they show one of the places they took me to was a planetarium. But do you want me to jump around, or do you want me to just go like as it happened?
Yeah, yeah, maybe go back and then continue with the story.
Okay,
Well,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
So after this man had the reunion, he greeted all these people were there. Everyone was applauding, and they told me that coming to Earth is a big deal because there are many souls who don't want to come here because it's so hard. Well, the next place, this is when things started happening really quickly. He took me to the outside of this other building, and it was this huge, sprawling, rectangular building, white marble, again with white marble columns out front. And then he took me to the inside. In the inside, he took me to one of the rooms, and it was a round room, perfectly round, and it looked like a movie theater. And on the top were all these movie screens, all in a circle around me, and they looked like just like you would see in a movie theater. And my guide said, "This is the life review." Well, all of a sudden, it was like somebody turned on the projectors, and every one of these movie screens lit up. And what they were playing was an episode of my lifetime. One time was me as a little toddler. One of the screens showed me as an infant. One of the screens showed me as I was entering kindergarten. And every single screen had a different aspect of my life up until the age that I was, which was 21. And my guide said, everybody has a life review. And the idea is to see how you did in that lifetime. And one of the things that I learned most about this was that there is nobody on the other side or heaven or the afterlife who judges you. There is no judgment. God doesn't judge you. Jesus doesn't judge you. You look at your life review with your guide. And the idea is to see how you did. Did you accomplish everything you set out to accomplish?
Mhm.
And what was extraordinary is that when you're looking at this, when you're looking at all these different screens, you can feel how you affected other people. And there was an episode when I was in elementary school, I think I was in second grade. There was another student named Troy, and Troy had some kind of problems with his legs, either an MS or Parkinson's, something where he couldn't use his legs, and he had to walk with crutches. Well, one of these days we were at recess, and he tripped and he fell, and I ran over there and I picked up his crutches, helped him get up, and I never thought anything about that. It was just no big deal.
Mhm.
Well, on the other side during my life review, I could feel how that act helped him.
Right.
And it was just and I never thought anything about that. But on the other side, those are the things that they look at. That's
Yeah.
valuable. That's something that really makes a difference. Well, also, you also feel if you hurt somebody, you also feel what that person felt. And my guide explained to me that the life review is the greatest soul's teacher because
Mhm.
they feel what other people felt. And
Right.
that's how they learn.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think people don't realize that, I guess, they everybody talks about karma like it's like some you know what I mean, but everything that we do has an energetic ripple effect. And
Yeah.
so when we do something good, sometimes it's a really big ripple, sometimes it's a smaller ripple, but that in that particular one person that it comes into, it's a profound ripple. Like
Yeah.
it
Yep.
literally changes that. So that's very cool. I also love it because they're just showing me the whole, you know, when you're describing, where you were with the pillars and the marble and all of that, it sounds very old, right? Everything's
Yeah.
But when you talk about the screens and there's technology in there that we don't clearly don't have here yet to be
Oh,
able to.
there's something else later on that I'll tell you that really blew my mind about technology.
Yeah, okay. I wanna get that. Okay, so continue on then.
Okay,
So
so
let's go.
that was the life review. He and then my guide said everybody has a life review, and that's how the soul learns, how they affected other people.
Yeah.
The next place he took me to again was another huge sprawling building with white marble columns. Takes me to the inside, and this time he takes me to a room that looked like what we would say was a regular movie theater. We were standing in the back, and the screen was up front, and my guide said, and this was something, Jody, that was really hard for me because I was raised so Catholic.
Mhm.
But he said to me, "I'm going to show you past lifetimes," and he wanted me to be able to tell people that we don't have just one lifetime unless you want to. You can have as many lifetimes as you want. It's totally up to the individual soul. So all of a sudden, the screen lights up, and it's me. It's a lifetime of me somewhere in Southeast Asia. And I had a shaved head, and I had a red gown or a robe on. And it was like in a monastery, and there were all these kids. And my job was to teach these kids about how to be monks. And then that screen disappeared. Another one started. It was like the movie started again, and it was me, again me, and I had a wheelbarrow, and I had all of these shoes in this wheelbarrow. And my job in that lifetime was to fix people's shoes in this village.
Wow.
And I would take the shoes back to everybody's village and drop them off. And so I was like a shoe repair person. And then that just went away. The third one came up, and this life happened somewhere in the Middle East. And I was either on an ocean or a lake in a wooden boat, and I was standing, and I had these nets, and I was throwing nets into the water to help catch fish for the village. Well, I had a really hard time with this because that's not talked about in Catholicism. There's no talk about past lifetimes, but the soul has been around forever, just like God, and
Right.
we can have as many lifetimes as we want to. And what's interesting is that nobody tells us we have to have a life. It's totally up to the individual soul. We choose if we want to come in or not. And here's what I learned too is that on the other side, we can still learn. And I'll talk about that later on. There's all kinds of ways we can learn, but it's not experiential learning. The reason that we come to a place like Earth is to experience the things we can't experience on the other side. And one of the things that we learn the most from is when we go through something difficult, when you go through something hard. And that's why we come here, because on the other side, there's no divorce, there's no death, there's no job loss, there's no war, there's no hunger, there's no disease. All those things only exist here.
Mhm.
And we come here to experience the hard things because that's what we learn from. And even if you look back at yourself like 10 years ago to where you are now, you've become so much more because of what you went through. And it's almost like we come here to test ourselves. And I think that there are really two reasons from my experience, two reasons why we're here. The first one is to come in to learn what we wanted to learn, to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. That's the first one. And the second thing we come here for is to help others. And something that I learned from the Dalai Lama that I read this years ago, he said, our prime purpose in life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And that's something that I think the other side wants us to do. That's why we're here to make a difference and help other people too.
Yeah.
And that was once I saw that we have past lifetimes, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Because there's so many interests that people have. If you look at every child has a different interest. Some want to be a fighter pilot, some want to be a police officer, some want to be a nurse or a teacher. And you wonder, where does that come from? Where
Mhm.
does that interest, and everybody has their own interests, and it comes directly from the other side, the kind of things they like to do over there.
Right, yeah.
And that was the past life building. You'll like this one too. The next one he took me to, again, took me to the outside, and this one was a round building, round with a big dome on it, a big round dome. And there were marble columns all around the circle. And this is the place, and I wish I would have asked my guide why, but I don't know. But this building is where we go when we plan a lifetime. So he takes me to the inside of this building, and he walks me up to a beautiful white marble table. And there's a scroll sitting on this table. And you know what scrolls look like from ancient Egypt? They look like papyrus paper.
Right, yes.
That's what it looked like. And it was rolled up, and there was a blue ribbon around it. And my guide said, everybody plans their lifetimes. And he was telling me that we plan the major events of our lives. What
Mhm.
country we're going to be born into? What language are we going to learn? Are we going to go to college? Are we going to have children? What kind of career are we going to have? And all of these things go on the scroll. So I picked up the scroll and I took the ribbon off, and I sprawled it out on the table. I rolled it out, and as I could see, it was all in black lettering. And it looked like, do you remember when you were a kid that you had that class about calligraphy?
Right,
You would
yes.
take you would take the pen, dip it in the ink. That's what this writing looked like.
Right.
Well, he was explaining to me that we all choose our lifetimes. We come in here for specific reasons. Nobody's life is an accident. We all have different reasons for being here.
Mhm.
Well, right about then, I tried to read it, and all of a sudden, it folded up again, and I
Hmm.
wasn't able to read what I had written. And I
Right.
think I think the reason was because if I had known ahead of time what I had planned to learn, I may have done something to circumvent that.
Right.
So I
Yes.
wasn't able to read it. Well, right about then, I looked over to my left, and there was this huge, sprawling window, this huge window that I could see outside. And there was a walkway, and there were all these people walking back and forth. And this is the first time I really saw a bunch of other people, and they look just like we do. Some people wear robes or gowns, other people wear jeans and a t-shirt. It's everybody wears what they want to wear. And on the other side of this walkway, there was a lake. And even to this day, I have never seen a lake that beautiful. It looked like glass, and you could see the bottom of the lake. And it
Wow.
was this big circle, and all around the lake were these weeping willow trees. Have you ever seen those?
Mhm. Oh,
They're the
yes.
they have all their branches that come down,
Yes, yes.
and
It's my husband's
all
favorite tree.
yeah, yeah, they're absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
And on the surface, all the leaves of these weeping willows were sitting just on the surface. They
Oh,
were all
wow.
yeah, they were all draped down into the lake, into the river, or to the lake. And my guide said, everything you like to do on Earth, you can do on the other side. If you like to go hiking or swimming, or you want to go to a music festival, or you want to take classes, or you like to write, everything you like to do here, you can do over there. And I
Mhm.
thought that was extraordinary. Well, the next place he took me to was inside the same building. He took me to an area that looked like a library, and that looked like a library full of Encyclopedia Britannicas. You know how they all look the same?
Yes, yes.
All these Encyclopedia Britannicas look the same. And he walks me up to one, and as I'm looking at it, there's writing on the binding, but it doesn't go horizontal. The writing goes vertical, and it
Mm,
said Nina, Nina.
mm,
And he explained to me that everybody on the other side, when God created us, he created all of us with soulmates. Well, I had never heard that term before. I didn't even know what a soulmate was,
right.
but we all have soulmates. That's our perfect mate on the other side. And he was showing me this was my soulmate's book. Her name is Nina. and we all have them. And what this book contained was everything about this soul, the
Right.
lifetimes that they had, their experiences, and everything was is contained inside these books. And he just wanted me to be able to explain to people that if you never find who you think is your soulmate here on earth or the love of your life, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means maybe you didn't plan to have that in your lifetime. But on the other side, we all have our perfect mate who's with us
Right.
for eternity.
Yeah.
Isn't that neat?
That is so cool. And so I have to ask then, is are you married now? Are you
Yeah.
and
And
is her name Nina?
I don't know. No, her name is Sherry. Yeah, her name, but I don't know if that's her or not. I don't know.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting.
It isn't it though. It really is. So
Yeah, that's yeah,
that was
that's
where in this the buildings there, they're so large. I can't even begin to describe how big they are. Well, here's something that my favorite part. Remember when you asked me earlier about Earth?
yes, yes.
He takes me to, and this was the first time the buildings looked different. He takes me to this building, and it looked like what we would say is a sports stadium, this huge stadium. So he takes me to the inside, and the first thing I notice is it's extremely bright. All the lights are on. This bright stadium, and there were thousands of seats here.
Wow.
And I looked up, and it was a domed roof. And what it was is my guide took me to a planetarium. Remember when you were a kid, you went field trips and you went to the planetarium?
Yes.
That's where I was. They have one of these where I was. And there was a gentleman behind me. And again, I don't know why I never turned around. I didn't look at him, but he was a guy who ran the planetarium. On the other side, everybody seems to have jobs. And it's not like we have jobs, so we have to go to pay our bills, to pay expenses. It's not like that over there.
Mhm.
They do the things that they love to do. And
Right.
this gentleman loved to run the planetarium. He knew all about planets and stars and galaxies. And he said, "Let's begin." And all of a sudden, all the lights go off, pitch black. And I sat down. And he said to me, "When you look at the stars, this is what you see." And what he was telling me was that everybody on Earth, at this time of their knowledge and development, this is what they see. And all of a sudden, our sun showed up. Our sun, then planet Earth, then Mercury, Mars, Venus, Saturn, all of the planets in our solar system showed up on the ceiling. And then it disappeared. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And he was talking about all the people on the other side. This is what we know. And all of a sudden, planet after planet started showing up. First, there were a dozen, then hundreds, then
Wow.
thousands, and then millions of other planets showed up.
Wow. Wow.
And he said, there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly imagine.
Right.
And I think there were two reasons why my guide took me here.
Yeah.
The first one was to tell me that Earth is not the only inhabited planet.
Right.
There are billions.
Yeah.
And he also said that Earth is not the only place where you can have a lifetime. And that absolutely blew my mind because
Right.
I'm the product of Star Trek. I remember
Right.
when I was a kid, I used to watch Captain Kirk after school on Star
Right.
Trek.
Right. Right.
And I always loved science fiction.
Yeah.
Well, here's something that I've always loved astronomy. And when I saw on that ceiling all the billions of planets, I started to do some research in astronomy. And I want to tell your audience something that I think is going to blow their mind because it blew my mind. The Milky Way, we all live in the Milky Way galaxy. That's our galaxy.
Right.
And it's not an unusual galaxy. It's what they call a medium-sized galaxy. And astronomers measure distances in terms of how fast light travels in a year. because the distances are so vast, and the speed of light is 186,000 miles a second. Well, if we had a ship that could travel at the speed of light, and you put that ship at one end of our galaxy, and it took off to try to get to the other end of the galaxy, it would take 99,000 years to get there.
Right. That's
And
a long
they,
trip.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and the astronomers estimate that in the Milky Way alone, there are 100 billion planets.
Yes.
And if you look at if and all the data that they have now from the James Webb telescope and the Hubble telescope,
Mhm.
they think that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the universe.
Wow.
Well, if there's 100 billion planets just in the Milky Way, and the
Mhm.
Milky Way is an average sized galaxy,
Mhm.
can you imagine how many planets that is?
Right.
It's
Right.
absolutely extraordinary. I still can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah, it's absolutely mind-blowing and to think about how many of those planets have, aspects of who we are living on the planet, and yeah, like, so much. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
mind-blowing. Absolutely. I love that so, so much.
So here's another really cool part that I liked a lot. After he takes me to the planetarium, he takes me to this other building, and this one was a little bit different. It was a long building, but it didn't have columns on the side. It had columns only in the front. It looked like our Supreme Court building.
Mm,
It had all these steps that you'd have to walk up to get to where the entrance is. So we go inside, and the inside is a huge library. It had huge, they looked like wooden bookshelves that were 20 or 30 feet high with books as far as you could see. And there were people studying, people visiting, people looking for books. And he takes me over to the left side of this library. And on the left hand side were all these study rooms. They looked like they were the size of somebody's average living room. And there was a woman who was sitting with her back to me, and she had jet black dark hair, straight black hair down to her waist, and she was wearing like a purple kind of maroon colored gown or a tunic. And remember when we talked about earlier the technology?
right, yes.
This was I wanted to tell you. She was sitting there and she was watching what we would call today is a flat screen TV mounted on the wall. And I thought that was the strangest thing because back when I had my experience in 1987, we didn't have TVs like that.
Right, right, yes,
Yeah, we had
yes.
those
Yeah.
big bulky ones that
Right, that's
they
right.
wouldn't, yeah, they wouldn't fit. You couldn't put one on a wall.
Right.
And so my guide says, "Look at what she's watching." So I get closer and I'm watching her and I'm thinking to myself, okay, she's watching a movie. And what this was, there was I thought it was a movie about a battle that was taking place 200 years ago in Earth's history. And
Mhm.
it was Native American Indians on horseback fighting against United States cavalry on horseback. And I thought, oh, she's just watching a movie.
Right, a history
Yeah.
program. Yeah.
Well, my guide said she's watching a real battle.
That's happening live.
Yeah, and I
Wow.
said in my mind, and my guide heard me in my mind say this. I
Mhm.
said, "How is that possible? Because we didn't have video cameras back then.
Right.
How was she seeing this?"
Yes.
And Alan said to me, "Everything gets recorded."
Wow.
And I was like, "Oh my gosh." So on the other side, you not only can you learn by reading, going to a library,
Yeah.
but you can go to this library and you can go to these study rooms and you
Yeah.
can watch anything that ever happened in history.
And find
You
the
can
actuality about it, not just the perception of it. Yeah.
exactly. You can see and I can't even begin to fathom how that's possible.
Right.
It's a God thing. It's
Yeah.
just a God thing that everything gets recorded. Nothing is hidden from God. And if you
That's
want to
amazing.
learn, yeah,
Yeah.
isn't it though? It's
Yeah, that is
absolutely
amazing.
fascinating.
Mind-blowing for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, you say though that you returned, right? With and there's a part of me that is like, why would you want to return?
Yeah.
Why would you ever want to leave there, right? Because yeah,
Well,
forever changed, obviously.
listen to this. This will blow your mind too. So the next place he takes me to, and this I'm almost at the end. I don't know if you have to go.
No, no, no. You keep telling
Okay,
us. We're
okay.
yeah, we're hanging on.
Okay, so this is the last building he took me to, and it was a castle like you would see in Germany or France or England, made of stone, this beautiful large stone castle.
Yeah.
And he tells me that on the other side, not only do you have the opportunity to learn by reading books or watching videos and all these things, but you can actually go see what people lived in these different periods of Earth's history. So he takes me to the castle. He says, "Let's walk in." So we go in, and the first thing I notice is there's all this red carpet all along the floor, and it made you feel like you were royalty when you walked in. And
Right.
on both sides of the walls were life-size paintings of people that had lived in medieval Europe during that time period. And there were people like kings and queens and princesses, and all their paintings, life-size paintings of what they looked like in that lifetime, were on the wall. And in front of every one of these pictures, there was a podium. And on top of the podium was a book. And the book was about that person's lifetime.
Hmm.
So let's say you're on the other side. You never had a lifetime in medieval Europe, but you want to learn about that. You can go to the castle. You can see what it was that they lived in, what the buildings were like. You can walk in, you can look at the paintings to see what they looked like and what they were wearing.
Hmm.
And then you could read about them on this book about them on the podium.
Right.
Well, right about then I looked over to my right, and you know how castles have those round stairwells you can go down?
Yes. Spiral.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
There was a woman coming down that spiral staircase, and she had a peach colored gown on, like a peach colored tunic, and
Right.
she had kind of strawberry blonde hair that was on her shoulders. And she walked up to me and she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" I said the stupidest thing to her. I said, "No thanks, I'm just looking." And I could have asked her. It was like I was in a retail store
Right.
buying
Right.
looking for clothes. "No, I'm just
Yeah.
looking." Well, my guide said that on the other side, she is like what we would call a professor.
Hmm.
She knew everything about medieval history on Earth. And you could come to her, you could come to a place like this on the other side, and
Right.
you could come talk to someone like her
Right.
and ask her anything.
Right.
So that was the last part of the physical places he took me to. And here's the last part that happened. Ellen takes me to, and to this day, I have still never seen a meadow like the one he took me to. This beautiful meadow, rolling hills, beautiful grass. It was a perfect day. No wind, the sun was out, just a perfect day. And then he disappeared. He left. And I turned around, and when I did, there was a man in front of me. He had brown hair. He was wearing a white robe with a golden sash around his waist, and he had sandals that laced up his calves. And I knew instantly this was Jesus, the entity
Hmm.
that we knew as Jesus.
Right.
Well, as I looked at him, he was different than everybody else I saw. Everybody else looks like you and I. Everyone has their own personality, their own look, just as God created them.
Hmm.
When I tried to look at his face, there was so much light that was coming out of him. It was like shards of lightning. I couldn't see his face.
Right.
And he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." In the very second after he said that, it was like, boom, I woke up back in the hospital room.
Wow.
And what was so interesting is the way he said it. He didn't say, "You know what, John? When you have time, when it's convenient for you, when you're not busy, would you mind sharing what we shared with you?"
Right.
It wasn't like that. He said, "You must tell them there is no death."
Wow.
And that's ever since then, that's what I've been trying to share my story with anybody who will listen.
I love that so much, and I've never ever heard anybody so I've had personal experiences with Jesus, with the, the energy of, but in that moment where you said the light coming out of his face,
Yeah,
it's brilliant because, again, it's like that perception, he can be whatever you need him to be in that moment,
exactly.
but
Yep.
the message that, that he clearly gave you to bring back so that, you remembered all of that, and what a blessing to have actually remembered all of this, for
I know it's crazy, isn't it? And I remember it like it happened yesterday. That's what's so
yeah.
weird.
Yes, and that's to me is the part that makes it so, and like I said, because, what I can do when I'm following somebody energetically talking, there's a lot of people that I'm not gonna lie that have imaginations about things.
Mhm.
Seen it. I've taught a lot of, mediumship students, psychic students, and imagination is part of the human condition.
Yep.
But when you're going through, there was no blank spaces. So when they were showing me, then I know that this is real, that this really, really happened. And now I know you say this, but that you returned here with what you call a divine assignment. So what does that mean? And how is that changing your life? Like, how has that made things different? I mean, obviously, have you put a book out? Are you writing a book? Like, are you?
That's a really good question because when I got back, when I got home, I told my mom what had happened because I didn't know what happened.
Yeah.
And she gave me a book. The only book that was out at that time was Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life,
Hmm.
that came out in 1975. And I read the whole thing that night. And that's when I realized what had just happened. Well, I went through a horrible, horrible depression afterwards
No
because
doubt. I was
I
gonna ask you about
yeah,
that, like how it was like, I'm sure our listeners have had this experience where you have a really beautiful dream, like a very lucid dream, and you go in and the colors are technicolor and you have all these emotions.
yep,
You don't wanna wake up.
absolutely, exactly. You wanna go back into the dream.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
I was it's just a horrible depression that lasted at least 2 months.
wow.
I even thought about suicide. I thought,
Yeah,
"How in the world am I supposed to live here
right,
knowing what it's like over there? How am I
right.
supposed to do that?"
Yes,
And it just took me a long time, then I realized that they gave me that so for me to share it. It wasn't for me. It was the message that needs
right.
to get out. And
Yes,
when I realized that, I was like, "All right, John, you're just gonna be here for the long term. You're gonna just do your best and try to do what the other side showed you and tell people that there is
right.
no death." And
Yeah,
that's what brought me out of it.
and that's so important, and part of that, if we came into this lifetime with the remembering of everything that you came back with, we 100% would be on a bad day. I'm out of here.
Exactly. Yep.
Like, why would I even want to stay?
Yeah.
So, it's so important that we know that there's no such thing as death or dying. But I feel like also, like as they showed you all of the stuff, that we recognize that everything that we go through serves a purpose, like a greater purpose. And
Exactly.
sometimes the part that we don't always remember is that it's not always about us. Sometimes, as in our soul contracts, we actually show up to help somebody else through
Yes.
their things, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And that's a great way to describe it, soul contracts. That's absolutely accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so clearly, that the earth is the hardest classroom, right? They showed you that.
Yep.
But I feel like it's very, very inspiring when we know, it's kind of like we all have to go to school. And we go back to the, perfect analogy when John was in school and he was really struggling and didn't, but he didn't give up and he didn't like call it quits, and he didn't he pushed through, he found another way through it, and managed to have a completion, have some success, have some, and I feel like if we use that as inspiration of, Even when things are really, really hard and we just want to give up and know that we could go to the other side because it's there for us.
Yeah. Yep.
But ultimately, if we give up when we're mid-term, we will come back and do a repeat of it. So, I always say this, I took grade 9 algebra 3 times. It was
Oh, yeah.
it was horrible.
Yeah.
So I know that when we don't get it, we don't get a free pass of like, "Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it." No, you're going to come back and you're going to do it now. So you might as well just find a new way, right? Find some inspiration and go through this.
Get and get through it. Get through it the
Yeah,
best you
absolutely.
can.
I love that so much, John. So I am like, you need to write a book because not everybody watches podcasts and not everybody's
Oh, yeah.
online.
Yeah.
But
That's
there's
true.
definitely, I'm surprised that, somebody hasn't, a publishing house hasn't found you out and got you to write your story, but they
Well, you
should.
know
Maybe
what?
we can get that out there.
I have really thought about that. I think I will. There's so many things I would like to say, and I know that just like what you said, a lot of people don't watch podcasts,
Exactly.
and I think one of the biggest takeaways is that I wanna share with people is that you don't have to be afraid of dying.
Right.
The happiest day any of us will ever have is our last,
Yes.
because we get to go home. And
Yes.
people don't they need to know that. We all need to know that there's this is not all there is. Everything
Mhm.
that you go through, all the people that you lose in your life, they're not gone. They're just in a
Right.
different place. They're just
Right.
someplace different, and we're all gonna get to be reunited again. I wanna tell you something too. And this is the only other experience I ever had that what I would call a paranormal experience. Back, about 9 years ago, when my wife's dad died, 3 days later, he came to me in a dream, and he said, "Everything's gonna be okay. There are no accidents. We're all gonna be together again, and give it everything you've got."
Mhm.
Meaning, like, give it every because you take
Keep
with
going.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
You take
Yes.
with you everything you learned. Give
Yes.
it everything you've got, and that's something that I just cherish that memory. I woke up and I wrote everything down so I wouldn't forget.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing I've ever had happen since my NDE.
And that's huge because and I feel like that will come through, the spirit world will come through and give you these little reminders maybe when you need a little bump up, a little bit of
Exactly.
a reminder of your purpose and the purpose of everything that's happened for you. Yeah, that's beautiful. And one of the other things I feel like is also, and clearly when we talk about, you were dead for 7 minutes, but you got to experience all of that. When we're going through something that's really, really difficult, one of the things that Spirit will always say is, this is just a moment. It's just a moment.
Yeah, it is.
And
Yep,
so we know as we're going through this, it may feel like it's an eternity and you may feel like this is really challenging. But when you call back your power, you step into the light, you go into God's grace, right? You get all that, the moment gets lighter, right? and
exactly.
and th- and then you lose track of time, so then
Yeah.
you're right, and that's where we want to go. So that's beautiful. So I'm going to make sure that when we share this out to everybody, that we have John's website information, his
Oh, yeah.
contact information,
Let me
all of
give
that.
should I
Yeah.
send it to you, or I can just tell you now?
Yeah, sure, tell our listeners, and then we'll
Okay.
have it in there in writing as well, so they can
Oh,
just click on it and they
perfect.
can do
Okay.
that.
My website is johnjdavis.nde.com, and a friend of mine put on there pictures from AI about a lot of the things that I saw.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
you can actually see some of the things and what they looked like. And then if they want to email me, if they have any questions or just want to write, they're more than happy to reach out to me. I get
Oh, that's
back to
beautiful.
everybody. And
Oh, that's beautiful.
my email is johnjdavis65 at icloud.com.
Beautiful. And I will make sure you guys don't have to worry if you're driving and listening, you don't have to write this down. I'll make sure that it's all in the episode information. So this was wonderful. And I'm gonna put this out there. The book's gotta come. We're gonna everybody out there, you want to see the book go out, right? Because I know there are people that are not on podcasts, not on YouTube, not listening, and they're book readers, and definitely this is one of the books that needs to be read and written for sure. Okay. So, John, I want to thank you for crossing the veil and returning with truth instead of fear. That's huge. And, how your story reminds us that this world isn't the whole story, that we're not random bodies in chaos. Important to
Exactly.
remember now,
Yep.
right? But we're souls on assignment. So we're learning, we're loving, we're returning home. And for anyone listening who's been afraid of death or afraid to live, let this conversation be your cosmic permission slip. You are eternal, you are guided, and you are here for a reason. Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Jody.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Collective SOULversations. If today's conversation challenged you, inspired you, or cracked something wide open, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a comment, share it with your circle, and leave us a review. It helps us to reach more of the people who are ready to step up. For those of you who are ready to go even deeper into this work, visit jody-jones.com. The real work begins there. See you next time. Stay awake, stay grounded, and lead yourself forward.